So again, big welcome to everyone and especially to Kayla for making this possible and for making the time to see us, even though she's also in a not easy transition herself. In the first few minutes, I will just say a few words about you, Kayla, and then I will give you space. For everyone, if you don't know Kayla, she is a certified parenting coach. She's an educator, she's a Montessorian. She co-founded 2 elementary schools in Middle East that serve refugee populations. She has training in trauma-informed classrooms and resilience in children. She has certifications in social emotional learning and motivational interviewing. She holds an AMI diploma for 0 to 3, and she works with the Montessori Society for Education and Development in Lebanon. She's also under certification under Dr. Dan Siegel. Kayla, tell us if I forgot something in your bio, and I leave you space, and welcome and thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for having me, Lucy. It's such a gift to be with you all. Thank you all so much for coming. Yeah, it's a very relevant topic for our family right now. In general, we have moved a lot. We have gone back and forth between being abroad and being back in the States. We're usually based in Texas when we're in the States. So I saw some people in Texas, and yeah, even that kind of back and forth, but even just the moving from, waking up to brushing teeth to getting dressed to getting, out the door, and all of those kinds of things for our children can feel so huge sometimes. And so transitions are just a part of life, and there really isn't any way to avoid transitions. There can definitely be times where we want to minimize them, but transitions can actually be really beneficial in helping our children to foster that resilience, helping them to understand how to move through things, move through activities with our support. And so another thing I just want to say is that every child is also going to handle different transitions differently, right? Every child is very unique, and what might be a breeze for one child, and I'm sure we all have experience in this, what might be so easy for one child can feel impossible with another child. And that can be due to a number of factors, like temperament, developmental trauma can also play into that, personality and past experiences, and connection with their primary caregiver. So lots of things can impact that. I think on Instagram, we can find a lot of one size fits all solutions that are good and can work for most children, but they're not going to work for every child. And so what I want to do is walk us through a framework that we can apply to every child and see their uniqueness and how they uniquely experience that transition and what they need in that transition. And so that's what I'm hoping to do today. I know there were a lot of questions, and so hopefully we'll get to a few of those, and hopefully as we go through this, it'll answer some of those questions that were submitted. So I have been very much influenced, as Lucy said, by Dr. Dan Siegel. Another very framework for me has been the polyvagal theory by Dr. Stephen, and both Dan Siegel's teachings and Dr. Porter's teachings really fit well together. It can give us a really helpful understanding of the autonomic nervous system. and how our nervous systems influence emotion regulation. Our stress response is critical when understanding behavior, and how social connection can impact and help bring that regulation, help bring down the stress response. So even when we're looking at smaller transitions, like going from play to bedtime, or bigger transitions like moving homes, these a lot of times, right, in these types of situations, we are seeing behavior, we're seeing the emotional response that then turns into usually unwanted behavior. And so my hope is that as we understand this framework, we can support our children through these transitions, through attunement, through tuning into their specific needs. So the first thing I want to talk about, and can I share my screen? There we go. The first thing I want to talk about is the window of tolerance. And this is a really important concept when we're thinking about us and our children. The window of tolerance is this area in the middle where we are in our optimal, as they call it, our energy levels are in that optimal space. We can respond, we can problem solve, we can emotionally regulate, we can be present and think before we act or react. We can be flexible and go with the flow. We can navigate change. And if we're looking at the window of tolerance in terms of the polyvagal theory, this would be what they call the ventral vagal state. Don't worry about, remembering these terms, but the window of tolerance is definitely what we want to get. This is the optimal zone. This is where we feel safe. This is where we can connect. This is where we can navigate life. And so this is where we want to live for the majority of the time. But obviously life happens, and as stresses come up in life, which is completely normal, different hormones are released in our bodies, cortisol and adrenaline being some of those. And as those stress hormones are released, we can go up into hyper arousal. And so this is the fight or flight state. So this is the sympathetic nervous system. When our stress response is triggered, we're maybe sensing fear, and we're in that fight or flight state. And so this can be triggered by transition, when we're out of our routine, when we don't know what's going to happen next, when we don't have a lot of control over, and thinking about our kids, when our kids don't have any control over any of the decisions in their lives, and they're being, going, maybe they're moving homes, they didn't ask for that. And so this is where we start to see that behavior that comes from that fight or flight state, right? So fighting, I'm sure we can all recall some experiences where our child is in fight or flight and they're throwing themselves at us. They're screaming on the floor and kicking their legs in the air. They are refusing to do what we would very much like them to do: get dressed, brush their teeth, these types of things. Or that flight, we're at the park and it's ready to leave, it's time to leave, and they bolt up in the other direction. The other side of things, so when we go down into, this is the shutdown or the freeze. And so this is the overwhelm, the disconnect and withdraw. It's maybe seeing a child just going to their room and getting under getting in their bed and under the covers and not wanting to engage. And so in hyper arousal and in hypo arousal, these things are going to happen. Life and stresses come up, but it's our job as the parent or the caregiver to, one, help our child come back into their window of tolerance, and then two, to help them widen their window of tolerance. And so children naturally are going to have smaller windows than hopefully we do. Hopefully, it takes a lot more for us to be triggered or to get outside our window, go into that hyper or hypo arousal. And it's going to be really easy for our children to get into those states because their brain isn't developed, right? Their lower brain, their downstairs brain, as some people like to call it, that is pretty much fully developed at birth. That is where the fight or flight response comes from, whereas that cortex, the upper brain, doesn't fully develop until 25. And that is the part of the brain where decisions are being made, where they're able to regulate and to problem solve and all these things. So our job as the parent is to help and support our child in these moments so that we can bring them back into their window of tolerance, and then also so that we can widen that window. What can we do to widen our child's window of tolerance? Our children are learning the skill of emotion regulation through co-regulation. And this is super important because, and I think it's becoming more known, but there's the school of thought that says, let them learn to self-soothe or self-regulate. This is an important skill which they need to know, and we need to let them do that. The way that they learn to do that is through us. It's through co-regulating with us time after time and connecting with them in that moment, welcoming those feelings, however messy they are, be that calm presence and having a confidence that we're not shaken by this extreme expression of emotion. Like we got this, we can handle this. We're the adults and we've had decades of practice. And so nothing our child does can shake us, can throw us. And that really helps our child to feel safe. And if we think about the hyperarousal and hypoarousal, the stress responses, this really comes down to safety. It comes down to relational safety and having that person that the child can be relationally safe with in order to widen the window of tolerance and come back into that window. So another way to widen the window is cultivating an environment where children can be in tune with their bodies, being able to, I don't know if you all feel like you had a similar experience, but growing up, or what I think we often learn is that it's all about our thought and it's all about knowledge and information. There's a lot of focus on the mind and not as much focus on feeling the body and really being in tune with what the body is trying to tell us. And so with children, and I won't go too much into this, but some just really practical ways of doing those things is letting children, one, eat when they're hungry and stop when they're full. We want to cultivate this environment where children are listening to their body cues and able and encouraged to eat when they're hungry and stop when they're full, instead of Take one more bite. I know you're full, or you said you're done, but you need to eat everything on your plate, or you need to eat 5 more bites first, and these kinds of things that really tell children that they can't actually trust their bodies. They can't actually feel full and trust that, okay, now I'm done eating. So that's just one example. Another way to help widen that window of tolerance is through consistency, routines, rituals. These also help bring a sense of safety. And, obviously, there are times where routines get thrown off, and that's okay. Having the routines and having like pillars that you can do anywhere or adjust based on what's needed for that situation can be helpful. And then another thing to help widen that window is empowering with choices. So how do we bring our child back into the window of tolerance when they are in hyper arousal? And this, a lot of these actually go for both hyper and hypo arousal, but connection is key. Stop sharing my screen here. So we talked about how co-regulation is so important. And so bringing our child back into their window of tolerance is going to mostly be through connection. And there's a couple key ways of connecting that bring a sense of safety, that speak to the nervous system, that the child is safe relationally. And so first, and I'll just briefly mention this and then we'll go more into it, but our nervous systems are always speaking to each other. And so one of the biggest keys is being able to care for our own nervous system first, because if we're feeling dysregulated, triggered, if we're outside of our window of tolerance, that's just going to be a feedback loop. And so being able to take a moment and tune into ourselves and our bodies and how we're feeling is going to be the first step here. And then some kind of just basic things to be aware of in those moments when we're connecting with our child is how does our face look? Like how does our face feel? Are our eyebrows furrowed? Okay. It's kind of it's relaxing our face, relaxing our gaze, speaking in a tone that's melodic, that has some nuance to it, that has some melody to it, isn't flat, and having a calm posture, paying attention to our posture. Are we big and ready like this, or are we pulling away like this, or are we open and present and able to welcome our child's emotions? So once we understand how our nervous system is coming to their nervous system, we can then, every child is going to be different. So some children want to be held, right? Some children want to be pulled up into our lap and held, and that, that physical touch is really helpful for them. Some children, that's going to be too intense and they're not going to want that physical touch. And so we can be present without touching them. Sometimes play can be helpful, and it's going to depend on the child what that's going to look like. But if we can, and if our child doesn't want, that pull up on the lap hug, maybe it's a little less intense touch. Maybe it's a hand on the back or on their arm. Something that can also be really helpful is sensory support. Children will often gravitate different kinds of sensory support. So I know for one of my children, swinging and that movement through space is really helpful. And so sometimes what I can do is hold, like cradle her. And I mean, she's 5.5, but we get that cradle and we get that rock, and they're just, and for other kids, it might be that a quiet room is really what they need, or dim lights. And these kinds of things can really just, that nervous system